Okay, picture this. You've got a high-stakes international tribunal where investigators have to dramatically prove that a shipowner orchestrated a brilliant crime on the high seas just to sink their own ship. Now, that makes for a fantastic movie, but legally, you're looking at it completely backward. Welcome to this explainer where we are going to completely dismantle everything you think you know about maritime fraud and scuttling. We're going to dive deep into how the law actually works when a massive vessel mysteriously ends up at the bottom of the ocean.
So let's start right off the bat with a massive misconception. If an insurer wants to deny a multi-million-dollar payout by claiming the owner scuttled, which is the industry term for deliberately sinking their own ship, well, common sense, and honestly, plenty of true crime shows, would tell you that the burden of proof is on the insurer to prove that crime, right?
Actually, wrong. The reality is that the burden of proof never shifts to the insurer. This is crucial. Investigators usually don't need to prove scuttling at all. The real job of the insurer isn't necessarily to prove a crime was committed, but simply to create enough doubt. If you get this inverted legal reality backward, you're going to fundamentally misunderstand every major maritime fraud dispute out there.
To really unpack this inverted reality, we're going to cover 6 key areas today. Number 1, the burden of proof myth. 2, utmost good faith defined. 3, the Poppy Mem precedent. 4, the Icarian reefer case. 5, red flags of scuttling. And finally, number 6, the civil standard in English courts.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the burden of proof myth.
So here's the deal, and the rule is incredibly strict. A ship owner claiming a loss absolutely must prove, on the balance of probabilities, that their ship was lost by a peril that's actually covered by their insurance policy. We're talking about things like a severe freak storm or an accidental collision. But here's the catch. If the insurer just pokes holes in that story, merely pointing out the flaws and raising enough suspicion that the judge is left unsure of what actually happened, well, the shipowner fails to meet their burden and they get absolutely nothing.
Moving on to Section 2, utmost good faith defined.
To really grasp why the law comes down so hard on the shipowner, we have to look at the very foundation of marine insurance itself. The whole system runs on this centuries-old doctrine of uber rima fides, or utmost good faith, which was officially codified in the UK's Marine Insurance Act of 1906. Think about it. Historically, a ship was thousands of miles away, completely out of sight. Underwriters literally had no choice but to rely entirely on the absolute honesty of the shipowner. So, scuttling, that is the ultimate betrayal of that trust, because you are intentionally manufacturing the exact loss the policy was designed to protect against.
Let's look at how this plays out in court. Section 3, the Poppy Pie precedent.
This whole doctrine was permanently cemented in a wildly fascinating 1985 case. A ship called the Poppy Mem sank in calm seas and fair weather. Water just mysteriously flooded the engine room. The owners claimed a loss by perils of the sea, suggesting they must have hit a submerged object. And their best guess? A submarine. Seriously. The underwriters, on the other hand, argued it was just an old leaky ship suffering from everyday wear and tear. Now, initially, the Court of Appeal went with the Sherlock Holmes logic. Eliminate the impossible, and whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. They ruled for the owners, essentially rewarding the submarine theory. But then, the House of Lords stepped in and completely struck that down. They explicitly ruled that underwriters do not have to prove an alternative explanation at all.
What the House of Lords established was this deeply powerful third option, doubt. Investigators don't have to solve the mystery. They just need to make every innocent explanation so improbable that the judge is left scratching their head, completely unsure. If the judge is in doubt, the shipowner has failed to discharge their burden. They lose, not because a crime was definitively proven, but because the shipowner failed to prove their own story to the court's satisfaction. And that right there is the inverted reality of the maritime detective.
Okay, Section 4, the Icarian reefer case.
But, what happens when underwriters actually do set out to prove scuttling intentionally? Take the Icarian reefer, a ship that conveniently ran aground and caught fire in 1985. What's incredibly revealing here is the ownership structure. We're looking at a single-asset shell company with shares split 80-20 between two brothers. For investigators, this specific corporate setup is a massive, glowing red flag. It legally limits what a fraud claim can recover, while simultaneously creating this perfect scenario where destroying a singular asset immediately liquidates it into hard cash. In this specific case, the underwriters decided not just to cast doubt, but to go on the offensive and actively prove the owners had deliberately cast the vessel away, and it triggered an absolute monster of a legal battle. It took an intense 30 days in the Court of Appeal, which, by the way, made it one of the longest hearings in English legal history. But through unprecedented, grueling scrutiny of the forensic evidence, they definitively proved the grounding and the fire were 100% deliberate.
This case left a lasting legacy for how investigations are handled today. Because the expert testimony in the Icarian reefer was so fiercely contested, the judge laid down strict, exact standards for objectivity. Fast forward to today, and under England's civil procedure rules, marine surveyors, naval architects, and forensic investigators must be entirely unbiased. They have to be completely uninfluenced by the lawyers paying their bills. Ultimately, they serve the court, not the client.
Which brings us to Section 5. Red flags of scuttling. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. When you bring this down to the gritty reality of a live investigation, forensic teams are diving into the financials way before they ever look at twisted metal. They systematically hunt for commercial discrepancies. For example, is the vessel insured for way more than its realistic market value? Is the owner facing a wildly expensive mandatory dry docking survey that they just can't afford? Or maybe the sinking conveniently happened right as a lucrative charter ended or during a massive slump in the freight market. You see, fraud always leaves a paper trail, and financial distress is usually the very first domino to fall.
Now, if the wreck is physically accessible, investigators hunt for specific behavioral anomalies and undeniable physical realities that flat-out contradict the owner's story. They'll look at the data. Does the weather and the GPS track actually align with the narrative? They scrutinize human behavior. Was there a super suspicious lack of distress signals? Did the crew casually step into lifeboats holding fully packed suitcases, suggesting they knew the ship was going down way beforehand? And finally, if they can get submersibles down to the wreck, they are hunting for the smoking guns. Seacocks deliberately left open to flood the engine room, or damage that clearly doesn't match a random submerged object.
All right, our final stop, Section 6, Civil Standard in English Courts. This brings us to one last massive misconception about how strict these trials actually are. Even though scuttling is a severe intentional fraud, courts do not require criminal-level proof. You don't need to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Because this is fundamentally a dispute over an insurance contract, the standard is simply the balance of probabilities. A civil court can, and absolutely does, find against a shipowner on this much lower evidentiary bar, even when the underlying accusation is outright criminal fraud.
And because of this framework, there isn't some dedicated international scuttling tribunal you go to. Instead, English courts built the exact rules, drawn all the way back from that 1906 Act, that the rest of the maritime world essentially follows today. Whether you're in the commercial court in London or arguing a case under India's closely mirrored Marine Insurance Act of 1963, English legal precedents like the Poppy M and the Icarian reefer remain heavily persuasive globally. They literally set the tone for maritime arbitrations around the world.
So, knowing that the legal burden rests entirely on the shipowner to prove their innocence against an absolute ocean of doubt, it really makes you wonder what else is hiding down in the deep, doesn't it? If raising simple, methodical doubt is enough to stop an insurance payout, how many wildly inventive lies have actually worked? How many mysterious submarines have supposedly hit rusting, bankrupt cargo ships in the dead of night? I hope this explainer changed the way you view the high-stakes world of marine insurance and the incredibly nuanced job of the forensic investigator. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.